Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome. My name is Amy Brownell, and we are here gathered together for another episode of the CFO Insider, where we talk about all things CFO and advisory related. Now, before we get into it, our topic for today, our topic is actually going to be fixed and variable expenses, why they matter. But before we get into that, I'd really love it if you would go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you are notified anytime we drop new content, so you can check out all of those comments and ask any questions that you have about these CFO and advisory services. That would be great. Before we get into the technical explanation, which is not very technical, of what the differences are between fixed and variable expenses, I have a question for you. My question is, if your client, if their sales drop 30% next month, would their expenses also drop 30%? What do you think? Yes? No? Well, the answer is, before the answer, most business owners don't know the answer to the question. And so they rely on us as their CFO to answer that question for them, to help them understand what expenses remain and what expenses go away. So let's get into this first of all. Fixed expenses are expenses, costs that don't change as sales change. So if there is a drop in sales, you still are on the hook for these expenses. So things like rent. So remember, during COVID, a lot of businesses went out of business or had to shut their doors. They still had to pay rent on their buildings. So that is an expense that is fixed. It happens no matter if your sales are 0 or $1 million. Things like salaries. So you still have to pay the people you employ, whether your sales are 0 or whether they are $1 million. Things like insurance and software subscriptions, loan payments, those are expenses that are going to happen regardless of what your sales are. Those are called fixed costs, fixed expenses. On the flip side of that, we've got variable expenses, which are expenses that do move in concert with sales. So things like material cost. Let's think of an example of a t-shirt company. So if sales drop 30% next month, you obviously don't have to pay for material for that 30% drop because you're not selling that shirt anymore. Same with shipping. You don't have to pay to ship that item, that t-shirt, to your customer because there is no customer. Sales have dropped. Things like commissions. Remember I said earlier, salaries are a fixed expense, but commissions, sales commissions, are variable because they're dependent on sales. Things like merchant fees. So every time you run that credit card through, there are charges associated with that. Usually it's about 3% or so. And what you need to do, if we're not running that credit card anymore, then you don't need to pay that merchant expense. And then finally, sometimes things like contractors, if you can cut back on contractors, that's usually considered a variable expense. So fixed is what you owe regardless, and variable is what you earn your way into. So variable are things that move with sales, that are always changing, difficult to predict at times, but that is the difference between the two. So why does all of this matter? Well, it matters for a few reasons. First of all, we need to understand how long our business can survive. So if you think about it, if all of our if 30% of our sales go away next month, if most of our expenses are fixed, we're in a pretty vulnerable position because we still have to pay the majority of our expenses because they're fixed. They remain no matter what happens to sales. So that means that we're vulnerable, fragile, and that is a position that we don't want to be in. So we want to make sure that there is a good split, if possible, between our fixed and variable expenses. We also use fixed and variable expenses to calculate our break-even point. So at what point is our business profitable? Zero profit, zero loss. So at that zero line, that's break-even. So the higher that our fixed costs are, the more revenue we have to produce just to break even. So those expenses that are always going to need to be paid, rent, salaries, things like that, we are going to need to continue to grow revenue just to pay for those expenses. Third, there is stress involved with fixed expenses. Anybody who's done their own budget at home, whether it's for a business or your personal budget, if a lot of your expenses are fixed, it's really hard to navigate lowering your expenses because there's not a lot you can do. Your rent payment, your mortgage payment, that's the same every month. So you've got to make enough money to cover that. In addition to that, you have maybe a car payment, you have maybe a credit card payment, you have car insurance and renter's insurance, and all of these fixed expenses, you have to make sure that you're earning enough money to cover. So that high fixed expense cost, if that is a high number, that just adds a lot of uneasiness and pressure every month. And then obviously on the flip side of that, if you have a variable expense model that is where most of your expenses are on the variable side, like I said, those sales commissions, shipping, materials, things like that, you have a little bit more flexibility to lower expenses because you could pull one of your revenue levers. So that is why it's important. Let's go through a quick example because I think this will help. Let's say we have a service business and our monthly revenue is $60,000 a month. So $60,000 a month. We have fixed expenses of $37,000. So things like payroll and rent and subscriptions. That equals $37,000. So remember, revenue $60,000, fixed expenses $37,000. Now, if our revenue were to drop to say 45 from 60,000, what could we adjust and what could we not? So we have that $37,000 of fixed expenses. We can't do anything with that because, like I said, they're fixed. They are due no matter what happens. And then finally, the things that we could move are variable expenses. So like our sales commissions and our merchant fees, the fee to run your credit card every time. Those are the things that we can adjust and make some movement on to reduce our expenses. Now, one of the things that I really want you to keep in mind is that when you're working with a business owner, typically that business owner is really focused on revenue, which is great. We love that. But we as a CFO have to focus on more than revenue. We have to focus on how much of our fixed cost is the total, how much, let's try that again. What percentage our fixed cost is as a percentage of our total cost or total expenses. In this context, cost and expenses are the same. We need to understand margin. We need to understand the cost of producing whatever it is that we're selling. We need to understand our break-even point. At what point are we neither making money or losing money? If we're just making zero, we're breaking even. That is the lowest minimum we want to go. And then finally, we need to understand our cost flexibility. How flexible are we to move our expense base as our sales change? So keep in mind, revenue is the sexy beast. It is exciting. It is where a lot of the focus lies, and rightfully so. But understanding the cost structure, that is strategic. That is what we as CFOs do. Excuse me. Now, a couple of other things. Some sample questions that you could ask your client about fixed versus variable expenses. And if they can't give you the answer, you can take a look at the financials and figure it out yourself. So things like, what percentage of your expenses are fixed versus variable? What is your monthly break even? So at what point are you not making money, not losing money? That break even point. Now you're going to want to calculate that and using only your fixed expenses. So how much money do you have to make a month to cover your fixed expenses? That's your break even point. And then you can ask, okay, well, if revenue drops 20%, what's going to happen then? And you can model that out for them. So if revenue drops 20%, you can adjust your variable expenses by 20%. And that is your new profitability number. And then finally, where do we have some flexibility to move expenses? We want to make sure that we understand exactly what levers we can pull if and when the time comes that we need to pull them. We want to have a plan in place. Sorry, I was just checking to see if we have any comments, which we do not yet. But that is all I wanted to cover. I guess one last thing. If I want you to remember this, businesses don't fail because they're not profitable. Usually businesses fail because their cost structure is too fixed, too rigid. They don't have any room to move when the big bad something happens. So that is something I want you to keep in mind. Having a watchful eye on that cost structure is super important. Okay, well, that is all I wanted to cover today. I hope you enjoyed our topic of fixed versus variable expenses and why they're important. Be sure to, if you have any questions, you can chime in here real quick before we sign off. Questions, comments, anything. If you are watching this video after we sign off, feel free to drop your questions and comments into that comment section below, and I will get them answered for you. All right, don't forget, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next Tuesday. We do this every single Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific. I'm sorry, 1 Pacific. Let's go again. 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So we will see you next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you later.